ghost stories? No, we don't have anything like that around here. We do have the story of Jacob, but that's about as close as you're going to get. You really want to know? Well, I'm not supposed to tell you, but alright. Just no interrupting. I don't have the patience for it. How to describe Jacob Emory? Well, I guess you could say he was the kind of guy you could never take the notice of. This isn't to say he was a bad kid, in any sense. Many people in this town thought he was the most reliable person for an odd job in the state. But he never really excelled in anything. He was the living proof behind the statement, Jack of all trades, ace of none. Most of this was due to his lack of own will. He dabbled in damn near everything this town could ever offer him. Automobiles, radio operation, store management, what have you. But he never stuck with anything. His friends and workers went after him about it a number of times, but everybody got the same unsatisfying response. It just wasn't enough. Needless to say, any friends he kept were either very patient or never spoke of the matter altogether. It was probably inevitable then that Jacob would leave to go abroad. I don't remember where he went, but I think Gertrude down the street knew before she passed on. You'll have to scout someone else if you get curious. In any case, no one ever tried to stop him. Everyone thought a little travel would stamp the ambition out of him, or else feed it until it was no longer an issue. Hell, we even gave him a sending off party, which I thought was pretty nice of everybody. So anyway, he was gone for 6, 7 years, can't remember. You have to check with someone else about that too. Anyways, he came back eventually and he changed oddly enough. He was amiable, energetic, all smiles all the time, and we all quickly learned why. He showed us a souvenir he'd brought back, a solid black stick, the length of a pencil but with the texture of chalk. We all wondered why on earth such a simple thing would prompt such a spring in his step. Until he gave his demonstration. He took the piece of paper, and with this stick, God, there's gotta be a better word for it, with this stick, he drew a crude circle. It dropped and rested on the border of the paper, like a stone. But it didn't leave the paper, but it acted on its own, sort of like an old movie projector on a screen. Son, I know how crazy this sounds, and if you feel like playing skeptic, then you can leave an old man to his craziness. But I know what I saw, even if everyone else is hushing it up. And that stone he drew dropped. Jake even passed around the paper, and as it was being passed, it rolled as the paper got tilted. None of us had any words for it. Hell, what was it to say? But he continued drawing, demonstration after demonstration for us. Stick figures in various pigments, plays doing everything from fighting other to making a perfect human pyramid, and we all thought it was incredible. And that was all the go-ahead he needed. He planned on putting shows to pay for rent and food. There he would draw anything the crowd members wanted. That we talked to some length about, and he eventually convinced us that it would be safe, and his drawings ethical, and the practice lucrative and unique, and the attention would go nowhere outside the town's borders. Poor Jacob. If I had not been swept up by the moment, I might have read the signs right then and there and saved that sorry son of a bitch by snapping that terrible thing in half. But I was younger. We all were. And we saw no problem with encouraging him with what we all saw as an incredible experience to be shared with everyone else. Now, he didn't have any of those big radio or television connections, mind you, and the internet wouldn't be around for another decade. So he decided to do what everyone would do on a shoestring budget. He advertised his show with flyers. Now, flyers might not mean anything to you big city folk, but in a small town, they gain a fair glance over from time to time. And what's more, Jacob managed to have his stick out by having these little figures jump up and down and whatnot to get people's attention. His first show must have got nearly 60 or so people. Probably a lot more than that, but what do you do? And his shows were fantastic. Someone would shout out a scene from a play or comedy, sketch, what have you, and Jake would fly over the white wall like a bird. He'd been holding back when he made that stone, that's for damn sure. His illustrations were all spot on, and he could make an incredible human figure in minutes. Come think of it, I don't remember any of his scenes lasting more than 10 minutes to make. They were all really done scenes too. Not only could you see a knight charging a castle, Jake would also draw the castle's interior as well, like a wedding cake split down the middle so you could see the knight scaling the walls, fight his way through the levels of the dungeon, fight back with the princess making a jumping leap off the castle's parapet onto a getaway horse, all in a complete silence. Not realistic, no, but it was all part of the appeal. None of us went in there expecting something real. When a scene or a sketch was finished, either the characters would leave off the wall, or he'd cover the wall with white paint. This was good, in a way. It gave those shows a time limit, so that when he'd finished with all 4 walls in the room, everyone knew the show was over until the paint dried. Jake, meanwhile, was changing in a bad way. I'd mentioned that upon his return, he'd been extremely energetic. Well, that energy, that vitality or fervor, or whatever you want to call it, never left him. Not for an instant. Far from it. It seemed to grow in him. He enjoyed it all too much. His eyes grew wider. He slept gradually less and less over time. His statements and opinions became more radical and frenzied. And although he never was a pushover, he was starting to make people nervous in his company. A month or 2 passed. Jake's audience grew like wildfire. Nearly everyone in the town paid to see Jake's art in action, and he had to rent out larger and larger spaces for them to sit. Now, he didn't stop after one scene was done. He moved directly on to the next. Put the next blank space on the wall, sometimes to the intriguing effect of causing scenes to mingle, which the crowd loved. The subject matter got more wild and immoral. The monsters got more bizarre and creative. The fighters used more impossible weaponry, and for all sake of the crowd's interest. Jake got steadily more indulgent, which we figured was from the money, and he became a drinker and a womanizer, neither of which got rid of that vitality, by the way. Some of those women claimed that they'd woken up in the middle of the night to see him scribbling with that stick on a drawing pad, a gigantic grin on his face, and while most of them said that they'd be amused that he was drawing them in the nude, there were rumors that 1 or 2 of them got glances of that notepad. Those anonymous few supposedly said those drawings absolutely were not nude pictures. But neither of them, whoever they were, will say what he was drawing. Don't bother looking for the notepad or flyers though, they're all gone now. I'm getting off track. The point is, he was hitting the bottle, and that's important, because it was that drinking that would eventually ruin everything. On the night of one of his performances, as he walked in front of his cheering crowd, it was immediately apparent to everybody that he was completely drunk. I was in the front row, and I could smell the bourbon on him from 10 feet away. Well, the show started. He went through a bunch of sketches and scenarios the crowd recommended, and when at the end someone asked him to draw himself. Everyone cheered for the idea. I guess they'd been wondering what his creations thought of him, and he eventually obliged. No sooner had Jake finished connecting the final 2 lines on his coat than every single character across the vast, extensive wall stopped and looked directly at the illustration. Lovers stopped kissing, clowns stopped laughing, robots stopped fighting pirates. Everything stopped and looked at the Jacob illustration. The crowd died almost immediately. I remember Jake's face at that moment, pale, white, full of terrible comprehension at his mistake, and looking desperately for the cans of white paint he'd forgotten to put out before the show. Everyone else? They were looking at the fake Jacob. That Jacob reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a black stick of his own, and as we all watched, drew a door. He pushed on his side and the door swung open, allowing him to walk through and onto the floor of the auditorium. The rest was an absolute hellish pandemonium. People screamed and ran for the exit as Jacob's characters, both of them currently on the wall and those who had previously left before being covered up, ran out of their own exit, throwing pies, shooting lasers, blowing fire and poison and the impossible. I was near enough the exit to escape and gave only one backwards glance. That scene will haunt me forever. Jacob Emory was being dragged by his creations, kicking and screaming, through the door his copy had made. The auditorium burned down, obviously enough, but I've no idea how many characters escaped, what happened to that fake Emory, or how many people died. The fire brought the fire department from the nearest cities up to 100 miles away. They in turn brought the police force, which brought the government, which hushed everything up. They took the flyers and any art Jacob had made, and swore everyone to secrecy or else life detainment. The fire was blamed on a cigarette in the garbage during a basketball game, and we all eventually went on with our lives. Jacob was made to never have existed. In retrospect, I realize everything. Jacob hadn't been creating illustrations. Illustrations don't move, much less act or attack. They're just images people see, shadows made to look like real things. Jacob had been making life, actually thinking things in some alternate dimension, using a power that was never meant to fall to mortal hands. He got drunk on his power, and his punishment was probably well deserved. Incidentally, the government screwed up on 2 different accounts. They did a damn good job silencing everyone, but proof remains. The ruins are still there, the auditorium's ruins. I hear they're going to start reconstruction soon, which will wipe out any remaining evidence as someone can definitely see. But I went back there once, several years after the fire. Just once. Amidst the rubble, covered in ash, I saw something squirming. I looked closer and saw Jacob Emory's hand on the wall, exactly like it had been 3 years ago. Sweaty, but calloused, I remember. But it was constantly flailing as if the body it was supposed to be attached to was still writhing in flames. That was mistake number 1. Number 2 was those creations. Like I said, I don't know how many escaped, nor how many the government agents found and caught, but I will only say this. Those tall grass meadows on the outskirts of town, don't go to them. Ever. You are asking about those white figures you've seen at night, right? This town doesn't have ghost stories.